Greetings and welcome to the 42nd edition podcast of Women's Liberation Radio News for this Thursday, October 3rd, 2019. I'm Sekhmet SheOwl, WLRN's resident female separatist, desert dweller, and incendiary device. A very happy Halloween to all of you witches out there. This month's edition focuses on witches and witchcraft. We'll look back at the burning times in Europe where it is believed between 60 and 100,000 women were killed after being accused of practicing some sort of witchcraft. We will also take a look at contemporary witchiness. We'll hear an excerpt of an interview I did with Max Dashu, feminist lesbian, and the founder of the Suppressed History Archives. We'll also hear from Ruth Barrett of the Temple of Diana, a contemporary feminist witch who shares her views of the craft. Finally, we round out today's program with commentary from Thistle about what witches and witchcraft mean to her and how they play a role in her life. The team at WLRN produces a monthly radio broadcast to break the sound barrier women are blocked by under the status quo rule of men. This blocking of women's discourse we see in all sectors of society, be they conservative, liberal, mainstream, progressive, or radical. The thread that runs through all of American politics, except for separatist feminism, is male dominance and entitlement in all spheres. To start off today's edition, here's WLRN member April delivering our World News segment for this October 2019.
On Saturday, September the 7th, the UK resistors and Get the L Out took to the streets of Leeds in a demonstration of lesbian strength. Over 150 women marched through the city's centre without incident of violence or disruption, with a message of lesbian visibility, solidarity, and pride. Thistle Pedersen was able to capture a Skype interview with one of the march's organisers, Izzy Dickinson, a resident of Leeds who worked with 10 other women on an organising committee for months leading up to the successful march. When asked what her favourite moment of the march was, Izzy responded,
"My favourite moment was marching down Leeds city centre roads with all my lesbian sisters, with me on my megaphone, shouting out, 'Lesbians haven't got penises,' and 'lesbian, not queer,' and in the sunshine in Leeds, smiling and people cheering us on."
To hear the full interview about the Lesbian Strength March of September 7th with Izzy Dickinson, go to the WLRN WordPress site and click on the Interviews tab. In September, the University of Edinburgh released an interactive map detailing the records of 3,141 documented accusations of witchcraft against women and some men, titled the Scottish Witchcraft Survey. Drawing on data collected for an earlier university project, the Survey of Scottish Witchcraft, the tool visualizes an array of locations linked with Scotland's 16th and 17th century witch hunts. Accused individuals' places of residence, sites of detention, trial, and execution were detailed. Intern Emma Carroll worked for 3 months collating the historical information and plotting the locations on the map of Scotland. In total, between 4,000 and 6,000 witch trials were held in Scotland, and approximately 5 times as many women were killed in Scotland than in England during the same time period. The map can be found at witches.is.ed.ac.uk/timeline. The Ontario Provincial Police will no longer be releasing the sex of the accused perpetrator of a crime or the sex of the victim of a crime. Although this implementation happened back in May 2019, media have only recently started reporting on it. OPP spokesperson Sergeant Carol Dion said the move came during a regular review of the Police Services Act, the Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Act, as well as the Ontario Human Rights Code. The OPP's operating manual didn't specifically state that a person's gender had to be released, and they still plan on releasing the name, age, and residence of the accused, and still reporting on the incident as well. Dion further stated, quote, "With all of those variables coming in, why should we release the gender if it's not pertinent to the incident? Right? Does it really matter?" End quote. Since January 2019, the OPP have been recording crimes on the basis of self-declared gender identity. Dr. Shuping Wang died of a heart attack on September 21st while hiking with her friends and family in Salt Lake City. She is best known in public health communities worldwide as a whistleblower in the Henan AIDS blood contamination disaster, whose refusal to back down in the face of government bullying saved the lives of at least tens of thousands of rural villagers. In the 1980s, Shuping was a doctor and researcher of hepatitis in China's Henan province, and due to her fierce determination, public officials were forced to change their method of collection and increase spending to check for hepatitis C and HIV-positive donors. The toll of speaking out include being fired, the dissolution of her marriage, and according to Wang, losing her happiness at the time. Wang also added, however, quote, "It also helped save the lives of thousands and thousands of people, and that she, quote, felt very gratified because my work helped to protect the poor," end quote. Women's rights activists in Mexico are celebrating after the southern state of Oaxaca decriminalized abortion. This makes Oaxaca only the second jurisdiction to do so, following Mexico City in 2007. Lawmakers voted 24-10 on Wednesday, September 25th, to scrap restrictions on abortion during the first 12 weeks of pregnancy, despite vocal opposition from the Catholic Church. Magdalene Lopez, a local representative of the Andrés Manuel López Obrador's Morena party, said that illegal abortions are the third largest cause of maternal deaths in the state. She explained, quote, "The women who die are poor and cannot pay for abortions. They are judged and sentenced to death by a system which believes it is dangerous for them to make decisions about their body," end quote. Women's rights activists in Mexico are hoping this signals broader reforms to ensure reproductive rights for women, as the Supreme Court recently upheld a health secretariat ruling that allows women to have an abortion in the case of rape. The court also ruled women in such situations must be attended to by public hospitals, do not need to file a criminal complaint with the police, and minors do not need to obtain their parents' permission. On September 13th, a lesbian feminist, Magdalene Burns, died from glioblastoma at the young age of 36. Made famous as a YouTube commentator, she touched the lives of many people seeking to put words to their anger and frustration at a movement that seeks to render biological sex, and consequently homosexuality, obsolete. An article in After Ellen stated the advocacy of Burns, quote, "continues to be an essential part of the radical lesbian resistance," end quote. The article continues with, "Magdalene's courage has encouraged women around the world, including the After Ellen team, to live proudly as lesbians. Her conviction has inspired countless lesbians to use our voices and take political action. Magdalene Burns is and always will be a credit to our community," end quote. Burns lives on through her YouTube channel found at youtube.com/c/Magdalene Burns. That concludes WLRN's World News segment for Thursday, October 3rd, 2019. I'm April No. Share your news stories and tips with us by emailing WLRnewscontact@gmail.com and let us know what's going on.
Dear Magdalene, when I first saw you, with your messy hair, it's all I could do to not get up from my seat and onto many women, a whole generation of women, and I love you very, very much. And that's it. Power.
That was Thistle Pedersen with her tribute song to Magdalene Burns. Next up, we'll hear excerpts of an interview Sekhmet did with Max Dashu, an American feminist historian, author, and artist. Max's areas of expertise include female iconography, mother right cultures, and the origins of patriarchy.
There were rebellions. There was a revolt, I think it was in 1518, in the Western Alps against the inquisitorial trials, where people were being dragged out of the villages and taken down to Milano and other cities to be tried by inquisitors on these bogus charges of devil worship. And so even that late, you still have people resisting those narratives. So, but they did break that unity of the folk culture. And whereas in the Middle Ages, you still had some solidarity among the common people as against the lords who constituted the state and the church. You know, the church and state were very closely allied in the social order, the order of domination. By the end of the 1300s, that solidarity, such as it did exist, had been broken down among the common people, and so they turn on each other, and especially they turn on the women, because the targets of this persecution were, overall estimates run to 8 women for every 2 men being accused, for one thing. And the numbers kind of get loaded in, because to be accused, there were more women accused, and there were more women tried, and there were more women executed, convicted and executed. So you see a very strong misogynist basis to the whole juridical process of the witch trials. And so this had a huge impact on Western Civ. You know, it was really the crucible of our modern societies, was this very anti-communitarian, anti-female, anti-pagan series of persecutions. And we haven't really ever reckoned with the impact this has had on women's liberty, women's freedom of movement, women's speech, certainly the witch's bridle, or the branks, as it was also called, the scold's bridle. All of these acts, not just the burnings, but the exiles, the brandings, fines, floggings around the church, various types of punishment, certainly imprisonment, those are all part of the picture. And public humiliations of women using the witches' bridles are part of this. It's not only those who were executed, but all those women and their daughters who witnessed the executions and who saw what would happen to women who went up against powerful men. And so this has never been digested by the European societies or the settler cultures here in North America. It was all brought over into New England. You have witch trials going on, even more than Salem. There were actually more trials in Connecticut. And as far down as the Carolinas, you have these accusations being brought in. And so it also shaped the colonial societies. And the same thing happens in the Spanish colonies in Peru and Mexico and Brazil and Colombia. And there it was the Inquisition brought its methods over into Latin America. So all of this, and this is really part of the reason why the word witch then gets picked up in indigenous contexts. If you're looking at Pueblo societies, for example, or Navajo societies, that was the word that the settler society taught them for an evil person who harms people. And so that word is used in English sometimes to describe those cultural traditions. It has nothing to do really anymore with the original folk witchcraft that existed in Europe, which was much closer in many ways to the medicine ways of native cultures.
So, not that we have to spend like a ton of time on this, but I did just want to say that as you were speaking, I was just thinking how, A, it's really interesting that there was that classist element to the persecution of
Very much.
so-called witches. That never gets talked about, and at least not in pop culture. Um, and I mean, not that you haven't already thought of this, I'm sure, but I was just sort of marveling at the just like the blatant male reversals of of all of that. You know, like that these men who are literally torturing, imprisoning, executing innocent women and even girls are telling society that, you know, these witches are the evil people who hurt other people.
You got it. You got it.
um,
And they're actually torturing people. You know, they're torturing and executing people while they're saying this.
and another thing that I thought that I would say, you know, for all the people who know or think they know or have an idea of what a witch is today, just in, you know, society, um, and who know at least that the colonial United States witch trials happened, I would think very few of those people are aware that witch hunting went back as far as it did.
Right.
Uh,
Yeah, in academia, they have a very narrow discussion that basically talks about maybe 300 years. But the cultural record that I've investigated shows a lot longer process than that. You know, it's layers and layers.
yeah, it almost seems like it's something that basically started with Christianity becoming a religion and has never really stopped.
But it predates Christianity. I mean, Christianity
True, yeah.
stoked this. But
Right.
you know, the next book I'm working on is about the Hellenic world, and I found evidence of the torture trial of witches in Rome, and then I discovered in researching the Greek world that they also had it. So that there's still this very patriarchal, misogynist concept of the witch as a threat to the social order of patriarchy. And so that's going on. I want to just go back for a second, though, to what you said about class, because it's important. You know, the archetype that was created in the period of the mass persecutions of the witch is a woman, often an old woman, sometimes a disabled woman, but usually, I mean, a common woman, a peasant woman. And that's how she's depicted in the broadsides that began to circulate as the printing press had just come into play. And this was something that helped actually spread the slander and the meme of the evil witch. And so you see, you know, a peasant woman holding a distaff, which was a symbol of the fates and a very powerful symbol of the witch also. But you know, this is how she's depicted, and the way that the trials went. And this is an overwhelming pattern that goes back as far as the 6th century in France. The accused is a woman, a poor woman, hardly ever any aristocratic woman. You'll see the accusation floated a few times, but very few examples of countesses being ever, you know, facing any real punishments the way that the common women did. Sometimes the accusation was used against powerful men, but even in those cases, the ones who were actually tortured and executed were the common women who were supposedly helping the bishop or this high court official or whoever the man was that their enemies were trying to get them. They would still go and find village women and say, oh, these witches were assisting so and so, Enguerrand de Marigny or whatever his name was, in plotting against the life of the queen or whatever the story was that was laid out. So even in those cases where powerful men were the target, still the one that took the fall very often was a common woman. And when you get to the period of the mass hunts, the whole process of persecution would start with those women in the towns and villages being accused. And then because torture trials have a tendency to widen the net, people didn't want to accuse their own family and friends, and so they would accuse people who were further away from them socially, and so gradually more prosperous people would get hooked into the persecution. And that was fed also by the fact that the judges confiscated the property of people, so that there was a motivation to go after the goods. And so then, but when a certain critical mass of males or of propertied women was reached, the whole thing, it was like a shutoff valve would get thrown. And that hunt would end for the time being. And it might not happen in that place again for another generation, or maybe it would. But
I was just thinking, like, I was just thinking about asking you, if and when and how these hunts ended. So I'm glad that you brought that up.
Yeah, and people would finally, they might be willing to believe that the old woman down the lane had done terrible things, but then when they saw the net go wider, it started to seem crazier to them finally. They disbelieved it, and they were more likely to disbelieve it if a male burgher or, a prosperous lady got of some reputation got hauled in, then that helped to put the brakes on. But the misogynist element of it was very strong. So, you have examples of very well-respected women. For example, in the Scottish trials, the North Berwick trials, the king himself he was involved. The whole accusations begin with his bride was being brought from Denmark, and there were terrible storms, and he blamed it on witches. He was really into demonology. This is the same King James that wrote that commissioned the translation of the Bible into English. And so some of the ladies or the more prosperous women that got hauled into court by him and tormented into saying they were witches were, a prosperous midwife named Agnes Sampson, and you have other women of some standing. Their standing and their class privilege did not really help them because they were female. So there's this multiplicity of factors at work. One of the other Scottish trials that was really notorious was there was a servant girl who was a healer named Gillis Duncan. And her master noticed that she was going out at night and she was going to attend sick people. And so he accused her. And the judiciary wasn't even initially involved. He was the master, and so he could beat her and accuse her himself. And then, of course, it goes to law, and then the trial expands out to other accused. And this was the pattern. And this is what we mean when we say a witch hunt. There was an extension from one victim to many victims. It was a craze. And it was a social pressure valve because, for example, in Germany in the early 1500s, the whole century of the 1500s, you have peasant revolts that were defeated. And so there was all this frustrated energy and all this pain. And so people could not. It was proven to them that their attempts to free themselves from their oppressors, the lords, weren't working. And so they began to lash out at each other. And you've got all these acrimonies of the village society being laden primarily on the heads of women. And sometimes old men or disabled people. And there's some evidence that gays may have been targeted, lesbians. The imagery of these pornographies I was telling you about that begin around 1500, these witch etchings that were a hot item on the seller's market. There's a really strong lesbian theme running through the art. We don't have very many trial records that bring that in. There are a few examples toward the later portion of the hunts where women were accused for being lesbians, but there is the representation of naked women kind of writhing around in each other's presence. And, this whole sexual theme of that was regarded, sexuality itself was seen as devilish. But the trial stories often refer, starting already in the early inquisitorial accusations of the 13th century, men go with men and women go with women. So the idea that sex was diabolical, but that same-sex sexuality was especially diabolical, was very much played out in the stories that were told about witches and the gatherings of the witches and the orgies that were projected on the witches by the demonologists.
When the last barrel of oil sits upon their table of greed, and the last men with their swords fight about who'll be the last to bleed, I will be with you in the woods, growing food as much as we are able, while the dead who die before they should, in our world that grows more and more unstable, they'll beat our dreams of peace and common good as we sit together as equals on the last day of the sword, on the last day of the sword. Sharing, the last drop is divine, showing us we did enough by caring for each other, the earth, the water, the sky, rocks, hills, trees, and ancient lullabies, and we will say it's all right to cry while holding hands, then drying our eyes, and we'll know what's true, what's right, what's wise, as we sit together as equals on the last day of the sword, the last day of the sword. These are the last days of the sword.
That was Thistle with her song Sword, inspired by her read of The Chalice and the Blade by Rianne Eisler, and depicting a post-patriarchal world in our near future. Now we turn to an interview Thistle did with Ruth Barrett at the Mycelium Mysteries Women's Retreat in the woods of Wisconsin this September. Ruth is a Dianic witch who spoke with Thistle about her practice of witchcraft in today's world.
Okay, this is Thistle Pedersen. I am sitting with Ruth Barrett. Welcome, Ruth. Welcome back to WLRN.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
And the theme of this podcast is witches and witchcraft. And Sekhmet SheOwl interviewed Max Dashu about the witches of old, the witches during the burning times. And I'm here today to ask you about the witches of today, contemporary witches and witchcraft. Can you talk about who the witches are today?
Well, it's kind of like saying, who are the Christians? You know, there's many denominations of contemporary practitioners. And so the denomination I can best speak to is the Dianic tradition, which is, again, a denomination or a branch of witchcraft that is entirely female-centered and female-focused and goddess-centered and feminist. A lot of different ways to describe it. Most other Wiccan traditions, that I'm familiar with, practice a duality between the goddess and the god, or what is male in nature, what is female in nature. And so what differentiates that, and typically those practices include both women and men, of course, you would expect
Can
that.
men be witches in this
sure.
tradition?
Of course. Not in other denominations. In Dianic tradition, males cannot. It's just, because it's not about them. It's not about the male life cycle. So it's just a different focus. It's really just a different focus for Dianics, because we focus on what we call women's mysteries, which is the physical, emotional, psychic embodiment of a female person, and also how our socialization in patriarchy affects our lives. We address the political as well as, externally and internally. We focus on healing, for example, ways to use ritual and magic in particular to have experiences that I would call non-patriarchal reality, to create experiences where, for example, a woman who is in a circle with other women may experience feelings of total self-acceptance or trust or experience herself as sacred, which is not usually found in the overculture, very purposefully. So it is also political as well, because if a woman begins to realize that she's been lied to, for example, her whole life about who she is, then that paradigm shift, that crack, begins a process that is really best supported in an all-female environment, where she can be together with other women and focus on internalized oppression, celebration of female mysteries, the female life cycle, the seasonal cycle as it corresponds to the female life cycle, which is what we do.
How many Dianic witch practitioners are there in the United States, do you think?
I really have no idea. I know that there's the larger women's spirituality movement, which encompasses women who are interested in where do women fit into the male-focused or male-centered religions, and a subset of that being the goddess movement, and this, of course, began at the same time as second-wave feminism, where women began to not only look for the divine female within the religions that they already grew up with, perhaps, but also the women who began to look outside of that, and because of archaeologists like Maria Gimbutas, for example, who literally unearthed the goddess from old Europe. So women began to basically discover, rediscover, invent.
During second wave?
Yeah.
the second wave of feminism.
And when I say invent, I'm referring to rites, rituals that would focus on us, because we don't know a lot about what women really did in ancient times, to some degree, but not much. We have to kind of piece things together. So addressing our needs in current times through ritual, and that's my focus as a ritualist. I focus on women's ritual making.
How many witches do you think there are? And if I'm sitting in Illinois listening to this podcast in a small town, and I'm interested in Dianic witchcraft, how do I find my sisters?
It's always going to be a journey, I think. I mean, there's more sources now. I came up in Southern California and co-founded what became the largest Dianic community in the country, Circle of Aradia. We then later incorporated under another organization, and then now under Temple of Diana. Temple of Diana is a national, federally recognized tax-exempt temple that is based in Dianic tradition. So there are many, many women, I think, that I certainly have met over the decades that identify as Dianic, that say, this is my path, I'm female and goddess-centered. It may or may not resemble, in practice, what I'm used to. Again, it's not that it's wrong, it's just that, women have created wonderful things wherever they are. And so there's a diversity of practice. There's not one right and only way, which is wonderful. What ties it together is the seasonal holidays, some basic cosmology in around, who is she? Who is the great mother? Who is the great goddess? Once and future goddess. And addressing the needs of women in their communities. And there are many, many women who are totally solitary in their practice, and that's also, that's fine. So it's really, really hard to say how many of us there are. There are certainly thousands, probably tens of thousands, but I don't know. I wouldn't have any way to really, really know.
Well, in the Lutheran church that I grew up in, for example, you would become a member, and so the Lutheran church as an organization keeps track of how many members it has, but Dianic witches don't keep track of its and you don't have to fill out paperwork to become a member. What makes a Dianic witch? How do you know if you are a Dianic witch?
I think it has to do with whether you resonate with the values, the cosmology, the purpose of Dianic tradition. Focusing on women, focusing on the female life cycle. There are many women who I know who have male partners, or husbands or sons, that also share a family practice with their families. And successfully so, because their husband can't participate in their women's circles, right? And he may or may not even wish to. But so there may be another practice that can include, that's earth-based, that's still honoring the earth as sacred for their male partners and sons, should they have any. So there's not paperwork. I mean, some organizations keep track of members. Like Temple of Diana has membership, which basically is saying, I resonate, like women can go online and read the mission statement or whatever and say, I resonate with these values, and if they want to be a member, they can. But you can be Dianic without being a member of anything. It's not required. It's really between you and Goddess.
Wonderful. And any woman can become a Dianic witch.
If that's
even
her
women
focus.
that are married to men.
Absolutely.
And incorporating their partner or their son into their practice, but yet it's still female focused. Well, and she does take time away to practice and to do her witchcraft away from men. That's a necessary part of being a Dianic witch.
It is because it's not. But really, literally, it's not. Sometimes people think about being separate or doing things away or apart. as being against, and that's really not what this is at all. It's totally missing the boat. To address female embodiment and being biologically a female person, a male is not going to literally be able to do that. How is he supposed to do that? Okay,
and that's not his fault.
And it's not. And he's no less sacred.
Right.
Okay.
So what is the role of men? You can address that.
Well,
maybe
the role of men in Dianic tradition would be is to be supportive to their partner and their needs. To be with women.
How is that not an inferior or subordinated role?
It's not subordinate because he doesn't participate in that in the tradition at all. He will go on his own path. He'll find where what he resonates in. And some are practitioners. I'm thinking about one friend whose husband follows a Norse path. And works with the runes, for example. So, and they have a family tradition with their child. A lot of times women want to include a male partner, for example, or frankly a female partner who's just simply not interested. And it's like, let everyone to find their own way. And that's where I come from. There's no proselytizing involved here. This is not about that. It's where do you best fit, and that can be a matter of you might choose to be in a certain environment for a period of time and then do something else. I mean, there's no you sign your life away. It's about seeking knowledge and healing and celebration. So I have practiced. I've certainly attended mixed pagan gatherings over many years. I don't do that now, but I used to quite a bit, and I used to also go to larger pagan gatherings and be what I called an ambassador around Dianic tradition, because in other Wiccan traditions, they would often have a very skewed and misinformed idea about what Dianic meant, and it's somehow a man-hating thing. And it's only out of a male-centered view that you could even call what we do male-hating. It's just because if it doesn't center men, doesn't mean it's male hating. It just means we're centering women,
right? And everything else centers men.
So why? But it seems to be very threatening to some people to be female centered.
Yeah. Could you describe for our listeners what a female-centered Dianic ritual with other women, not in solitary practicing, what that has looked like for you through the years?
Well, there's many opportunities to gather with women, and frankly, it's like it could be around the seasonal holidays, which is the agricultural year. That is something shared with other denominations of witchcraft, where typically you have you look at the seasonal cycle as a wheel. And you have the quarters and the cross-quarter holy days, the solstices, equinoxes, and the days. Every 6 weeks, there's a holiday. And basically, it's the farmer's year. It's how, the farmer's calendar. And so, given that many of us don't farm for a living, we ascribe other meanings to the seasonal cycle. So right now, for example, we've just crossed fall equinox and we're headed towards Samhain in the Irish, or Halloween, which in Samhain in the Irish literally means summer's end. It's the end of the summer. It's the end of the growing season. It's literally the first day of winter. And so because as I certainly teach it, we overlay women's life cycle over the wheel of the year. So we are now, fall equinox is more about perimenopause. And because we have had, the Earth Mother has given us all the food, and it's the height of this amazing growing season that she sustains us, and we are preserving the food now for the leaner times. And just like in a woman's life cycle, where she's literally fertile, And then things began to change, and she begins to, her cycle begins to shift and holds back. And eventually, as you move towards Halloween for Samhain, you move towards cronehood, which is early, being a young elder, but your bloods have stopped, and you begin to step into a different time of your life. And so each holiday honors a different aspect of the female life cycle. There is no particular age that has more value than any other. It's what you're focusing on. So you go, and no matter what age you are, you can recognize where you've been, where you are, or where you're going.
Wonderful. The Wheel of the Year, Mother, Maiden, Crone.
Yeah. And there's many, aspects. You could take the triple goddess, and you can actually, tease it out further.
Can you describe your altar at home? As the seasons are changing, how does your altar change? What do you have on your altar?
Well, right now, you could have several altars in your home. Okay.
Do you have several altars in your home?
Yes, actually. I have a personal altar. I have a family altar. And there may even be a third option depending on if I'm working on something specific magically. So right now at home, it's fall, and I'm going to be transitioning to a Hallows altar very soon. And right now you have I have an altar cloth that has pictures of wheat on it, and I have statuary that has to do with the fertile Earth Mother and her food giving aspect. And then as we move towards Hallows, which is a time of endings, it's a time traditionally to honor the loved ones that have passed, our beloved, friends, pets, ancestors that have passed. And so there'll be pictures that will go up of friends and family that are no longer here. It is about honoring those memories, and it's about honoring women who were also killed during the burning times. I mean, women are still murdered for witchcraft in contemporary times, unfortunately, in different parts of the world, including in the United States. There's murders that happen. I did some research a few years back, and it was just kind of shocking to see how that is still going on, and people think of it as the past, and the burning times are still with us. It takes different forms slightly, but there's still literally murder going on in different parts of the world, more prevalent than another. For a lot of the same reasons from the burning times,
Patriarchy's been with us for 5,000 years.
We're going to blame an old woman for why the cow went dry. I mean,
Thank you, Ruth. Is there anything else you'd like to say to our largely radical feminist and lesbian audience?
Yes. I would say I would invite women who are interested in Diana tradition and ritual making to consider purchasing my book. I have a wonderful book that it's in its third edition called Women's Rights, Women's Mysteries, and they can find that online. And Intuitive Ritual Creation. I'm also the editor of Female Erasure, which is a book that informs, along with 48 other voices, about how gender identity is harming women and children, and a lot of wonderful voices to speak to that. So, that's pretty much what I want to say. We have a wonderful gathering once a year called Daughters of Diana Gathering.
Where does that take place?
It takes place in the mountains in Southern California. It's an annual event. It's small. And daughtersofdiana.org, you can find out about that.
Okay.
And that we produce that every year, and it's a fantastic gathering.
Okay, thank you so much, Ruth.
You're so welcome.
This is WLRN.
WLRN.
Women's Liberation Radio
Women's
News.
Liberation Radio
Women's
News.
Liberation Radio
Women's
News.
Liberation Radio News. I've been practicing witchcraft ever since I can remember. The first time I met a witch was in kindergarten, sitting under the giant grand piano they had in the room. A girl from my class I didn't know very well crawled under to sit with me, and we instantly recognized one another, and were bonded for life. Throughout our friendship, growing up in Texas in the 1970s, we referred to each other as blood sisters, and even would share our blood from scratched knees or bug bites, itched just a little too much to strengthen our sisterly bond. The sharing consisted of rubbing one cut or bug bite onto the other cut or bug bite when they were still bleeding, so that our blood would mix and deepen our bonds to one another. Kids are weird like that, right? It was her, Sean, who came up with that ritual. Her ancestry included Native Americans from the region where we lived and people of European descent. My ancestors are from Sweden, Norway, Germany, and the British Isles. Who knows how we knew each other? But we knew. I remember Sean was a little bit older than me and wiser. One time in the 4th grade, I remember sitting up on the fence that surrounded my yard next to the mulberry tree with ripe berries on it, chatting with my BFF, Shawnee Boy, as I fondly called her. As we ate berries from the tree, our conversation turned to the meaning of words, and Sean pointed out to me that words like person and mankind that supposedly included us simply do not, if you look at the maleness they denote and what they are really saying. I know, yeah, she was precocious. Spent most of the time with her nose in books. I loved her madly. We climbed trees together and would sing up in the branches with the wind, practicing conjuring it at will through motions with our hands and pointed energy through our fingertips. We would make up elaborate stories of exploring time and space and other dimensions, to the point that I sometimes did not know if an experience actually happened or not. Our imaginings together were so strong. We felt the wind on our faces, we put our faces up to the sun, and we pronounced our lives good and our friendship sacred. Ever since then, I have followed my intuition and inclinations to create witchy music and chants, magic potions and brews, altars and rituals to honor the earth, nature and its cycles, and what Sonia Johnson calls femaleness in her book, The Sister Witch Conspiracy. Sipping on a potion of elderberry syrup I made from berries growing right outside my door, I looked over Johnson's book again today to aid me in writing this commentary. True to the life of a witch, I soon found a message in her book that is perfect, both for this time of year when the days grow shorter, and for the passing of our dear sister Magdalene, as we go into the darkness and await the birth of the sun, our star bringing light to the world. I found it while reading the final chapter of the book called The Embrace, which makes reference to a group of women who were tortured and killed in England during the latter part of the 16th century, and the rituals and bonds they created with one another before being captured by the Inquisition. The passage starts out with the author referring to this group of women and then launches into stories of their bonding and vows to find each other again in a new life after death and in a new time, the beginning times of a new culture that emerges from the ashes of the male supremacist culture women have lived in for thousands of years. Sonia Johnson's words resonate in my bones, as did the words of my dearest childhood friend on those long summer days we spent together in Texas. We women, all of us, regardless of our heritage, ancestry, political beliefs, religious beliefs, or anything else, all of us have our femaleness in common. Something denigrated, lost, forgotten, and treated as minor to who we are as people on this planet. Our femaleness is probably the most important thing about us, because it is our female bodies that bring new life into this world and sustain it at our breasts. The female body and ourselves are what we are, not something invisibilized and annihilated by words like mankind or person. We are not your sons, we are not female men, we are not less than because we are women. We are the most important half of the species on many levels, including the biological level. This natural hierarchy has been inverted by men and male culture. Women are buried beneath so many years of male tyrannical rule. Most of us are blind to its very existence and just accept male domination and violence as natural, and that there's nothing to be done about it. Witches don't feel that way, or at least this witch doesn't. The energy and power conjured under the full moon with our sisters of long ago and the present is powerful. If you have not danced and chanted with a group of women in a field or around a fire, make it a priority, because you don't know what you're missing until you feel the power of sisters in ritual together. I will leave you with these chants from Sonia's book, The Sister Witch Conspiracy. They come from the burning times when women found the space together to do rituals of grief and say goodbye before they were tortured and killed by the Inquisition. Woman I am, spirit I am the infinite within myself. I can find no beginning, I can find no end. All things I am, I will always, always love thee. I will never, never leave thee. Take my hand, we'll dance forever. I will always, always love thee. Woman I am, spirit I am the infinite within myself. I can find no beginning, I can find no end. All things I am, I will always, always love thee. I will never, never leave thee. Take my hand, we'll dance forever. I will always, always love thee.
Thanks for listening to WLRN's 42nd edition podcast on witches and witchcraft, released this Thursday, October 3rd. I'm April No. WLRN would like to thank our guests this month for sharing their views. Thank you so much, Max Dashu and Ruth Barrett, for speaking with us about witches old and new.
Thanks for tuning in to Women's Grassroots Media. Next month, we will focus our program on women in substance use and addictions. Our handcrafted podcasts always come out the first Thursday of the month, so look for it on November 7th. If you'd like to receive our newsletter that notifies you when each podcast, music show, and interview is released, please sign up for our newsletter on the WLRN WordPress site. And while you're there, consider a donation to the cause of feminist community radio by clicking on the donate button. Check out our merch tab to get a nice gift in exchange for your donation as well. In addition, if you are interested in joining our team, we are always looking for new volunteers to conduct interviews, write blog posts, post to our Facebook and other social media pages, and do other tasks to keep us moving forward as a collective of media activist women. Thanks for listening. This is Jenna DeQuarto, WLRN sound engineer and producer, signing off for now.
This is Sekhmet SheOwl signing off on another edition of WLRN's monthly handcrafted podcast. You can find us on Twitter, Facebook, Tumblr, YouTube, Spotify, Spinster, and SoundCloud in addition to our WordPress site. Thanks for listening.
And this is Thistle. Our monthly podcasts are always created with tender loving care and in solidarity with women worldwide. Thanks for your support. We would love to hear from you, so please share, like, and comment widely.
From all the women at WLRN, we hope you have a safe and fun Halloween. This is Julia Beck, signing off for now. But how will we find our way out of this? What is the antidote for the patriarchal kiss? How will we find
shown. And then after that, where is home?